Hello, welcome back to Seconds of Silk. I'm Silkauskas. Glad you're watching today. I want to share a joke with you. There's a guy sitting in a bar, a little small guy drinking a beer on the bar stool, and this big guy comes in and just whacks him off his chair. And he says, "There's a judo chop from Brazil." This little guy gets up, frustrated and annoyed, but trying to ignore this big guy. And so he gets back on his stool. He's just drinking his beer. And again, this big guy whacks him off his chair again. And this time he says, "That's a karate chop from Japan." And so at this point, the little guy is just frustrated, annoyed, angry, and he decides to leave. He's not going to deal with this. But about 10 minutes later, he comes back and he whacks this guy so hard, he knocks him unconscious on the floor. He turns to the bartender and says, "Hey, when this fool wakes up, why don't you tell him that was an American baseball bat from J&B Sporting Goods?" It's a funny joke, but it's a very real thing. And today what I want to talk to you about is confrontation. Conflict and confrontation. Over the last few weeks, we've been talking about relationships, and relationships are really important, and this is a problem that we all deal with. Conflict and confrontation. The truth is, the absence of conflict or confrontation is not the problem in relationships. A healthy relationship has conflict and confrontation, but it's a matter of how you deal and how you respond to that conflict and confrontation. Truth is, a lot of people are afraid of confrontation. A lot of people don't want to deal with it. They want to avoid it at all costs. They'll run from conflict, avoid confrontation, or they'll want to fight back in such a way that it escalates the problem, and that's not healthy either. So what I'd like to talk to you today about is dealing with confrontation and conflict in a healthy way. So instead of being afraid of dealing with it, afraid of being rejected, afraid of the outcome, we want to deal with it. Why? Because we can't conquer what we don't confront. You're never going to be able to control what you don't confront. In fact, what you don't confront will control you. What we never deal with will always deal with us. And so we need to understand that it's healthy to deal with conflict and confrontation. But it's a matter of how. I love the Hunger Games, the movies, and in the second one, the movie called, I think it's Catching Fire, there's a quote that is said a few times in the course of the movie, and it's this: it says, "Remember who the real enemy is." And I absolutely love that. And the truth is, there's a lot of truth to that. Remember who the real enemy is. In Scripture, in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12, it says that we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but rather we wrestle against powers and principalities. So what God is saying that people are never the problem. You might think your boyfriend, husband, wife, son, daughter, mom, you might think they're the problem, but really people are never the problem. It's always the enemy working through people. And so we need to understand that, because oftentimes we want to attack the person when we're supposed to understand that we need to remember who the real enemy is, that they're actually not the real enemy. So let me go a little further, kind of expound more on that. Henry Cloud, who's a great author, wrote this. He said, "It's not me against you, it's us against the problem." And so when you're dealing with a problem with an individual, you don't want to be approaching them in such a way that it's really attacking them, but rather you want to kind of be on their side. You want to partner up with them and say, "Look, we have this relationship together, but there is a problem that we need to deal with. Let's put the problem on the table and let's us together work this out. Let's deal with the problem." So now it's not the other person who's the enemy. Rather, you're on the same side working to really figure out what the problem is and how you can find a solution that's going to be good for both of you. So it's not me against you, it's us against the problem. It's a very healthy way to approach conflict and confrontation. The truth is, we need to speak to issues, but we don't want to identify people as issues. All people have issues. Some people have more issues than Sports Illustrated. They might have a lot of issues, but the person themselves is not the enemy. So you want to be able to isolate those issues and be able to talk to them about that certain issue, whatever that might be, so that it's not in a way that is attacking that person. Because as soon as somebody feels like they're being attacked, they're going to put up their guard, they're going to become defensive, and also often it's going to turn into a fight. It's going to get ugly. And so you want to be able to approach the matter in such a way that you're actually working together to find a solution to the problem that you guys have in the relationship. So conflict is actually healthy. It's really good. It's needed. Conflict is the price that you pay for greater intimacy. The truth is, if there was never conflict in any of our stories, any of our lives, we won't really have great intimacy with anyone in our lives. You love conflict and confrontation in a movie, in a good book, because it's going to expose what's deeper. It's going to expose what's on the inside. And so the good thing about conflict is very much like fire. Conflict can either burn up a relationship when you're not responding to conflict and confrontation well. It can just destroy a relationship, or it can shed light on certain situations and increase intimacy. And so it's actually, if you can deal with conflict and confrontation in your relationships in a way that is right, in a way that is not offensive or hurting somebody, it can actually increase the intimacy in that relationship, and you could enjoy a greater and deeper relationship. So the good news is, if you're dealing with a lot of problems with certain individuals, you have a lot of potential to grow in that relationship and to really grow deeper and to become more intimate. So that's a good news. I mean, that's a good sign. It's good news that that's hopefully something that gives you hope today as you're watching or listening. So be encouraged, even if there is a lot of conflict in your relationship, because you can really go deeper and you can really discover more and have a greater and more intimate relationship with that individual. So again, I just want to remind you, remember the vision. As we talked about last week, if you didn't watch that episode, go ahead and watch that, Seconds with Silk, in regards to the number one enemy of relationships. But remember the vision, remember the goal of the relationship. It's to actually have a relationship, to have a healthy relationship, to be together. And so this is a great scripture to end with. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 4 says this. It says, the weapons that we fight with are not weapons of this world. Meaning the world would want to fight and retaliate when there's a conflict or there's a problem. But those aren't the weapons that we use when we fight. Rather, we use supernatural weapons. So we respond with love. We respond with prayer. We respond with compassion. We respond by dealing with that isolated issue and not attacking the person. And so I hope that you remember all this. Maybe you want to watch it again. There's a lot of stuff I shared today. But I want to tell you, it's very, very helpful if you can begin to put these things into practice. And one last word is, even if somebody is always dealing with you in a way that's unhealthy and there's always problems, if you can begin to create a culture where you're beginning to approach all the problems like this, where it's not you against them, but it's you two against a problem, it's going to take some time. But as you continue to do it in love and you create this culture of dealing with conflict and confrontation in a healthy way, then man, there is going to be great progress and you're going to see great health take place in that relationship. So be encouraged in that as well. You have the opportunity and the influence to change any and every relationship that you're in. So be the leader, be the one that responds in a healthy way, and choose to not attack an individual, but rather realize that the person is not the problem. You need to remember who the real enemy is, and you need to remember how to approach conflict and confrontation, and that actually good things can come out of conflict and confrontation. So I hope this encouraged you today, and look forward to seeing you next week. Next week we're going to talk about the power of forgiveness and what unforgiveness can do to our hearts and our relationships. So we'll see you then.